My mom was basically a stay-home mom, and then she worked half-time for the Sausalito School District as a cook. She was also a firefighter. She was a captain, a block-board captain, when they lived on Woodward Avenue. And she tells the story that during World War II, she had a certain amount of equipment in her house, and there were certain wharf hydrants along the line. So she had hose bundles, 1.5-inch hose bundles, that they would have on a cart. And there was a fire at Woodward Avenue at the PG&E substation, grass fire. So she takes her cart and runs down to the standpipe, hooks it onto the standpipe, and advances the line. Another couple of people came to help her, and she has a straight stream nozzle. You know, she's an electric station. By the time Matt Perry got there, the fire chief, she had the fire out, but he was quite concerned that she was going to get electrocuted. So that was her big claim to fame as far as firefighting. But she did just fine. The interesting thing about Sausalito in those early days is that everybody was a volunteer firefighter. Everybody in the community was a volunteer firefighter. And what they did, basically, is they had a game well alarm system which would code like 314, box 213. It would be a certain location within the city. Certain people were to respond directly to the fire, and certain people were to respond to the fire station. So there would be, when you had a fire of any consequence, you could have 30, 35 people coming into a fire. Now, the fire department was also the hub of the community as far as community activities, parties, dances. Anybody of any importance belonged to the Sausalito Fire Department. That doesn't mean everybody had turnout gear or anything, but it also was a good department. It was a great community center. When I thought about my first response to a fire officially, I was 15 years old. It was 1960. And it was in July, and there was a grass fire down on Yellow Bluff in the south end of town by the forts. We got to the fire. My father said, "Come with me." So I got to the fire station with him, and it was just my father and I at that time right there. So Matt Perry calls in, and he says, "Who's at the station?" And he said, "Eddie Souza and my son." He says, "Roll the Seagraves." Okay. So my father says, "Come on, let's go." So we get in this 1934 Seagraves, 1,000-gallon-a-minute bumper. And my father throws all the switches and starts this thing up, and it's straight pipes. We didn't have any muffler on this thing. And it sounds like an airplane. So, and then he puts on all the lights, and he's got the choke going, and there's clouds of smoke billowing out. And he says, "See that button down on the floorboard?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Press that button." So I press this button on the floorboard, and the siren goes off. I said, "Oh, I like this. This is cool." So needless to say, we go to the fire, and I'm excited. I think I have a T-shirt on and Levi's and tennis shoes. So I'm responding to the fire with my dad, and we get to the fire, and my father and I pulled an 1.5-inch line up the hill. So we're going up the hill, and we're fighting some fire, and the wind turned, and my father said, "Okay, the fire's low enough." He says, "We're going to run over the top of the fire. We're going to get into the burn." I said, "What? We're going to run through the fire?" And he said, "Yeah." So we took the hose line and squirted it a little bit, and we ran into the burn. He said, "This is where you want to be. You want to work the fire from the burn out." So we're working the flank of the fire. So that was my first experience, and that was pretty exciting.
Tell us about your school.
Growing up in Sausalito was a wonderful, wonderful time in my life. Graduated from Richardson Bay School, which is now Martin Luther King, and then went on to Tamalpais High School in 1958. Did 4 years at TAM. Played football, wrestled, sports, enjoyed it very much. After TAM, I went to a semester at College of Marin. And at that time was 1962. And I played ball at Marin. and some of my friends were on the team. One guy, Tinker Ward, his father was lieutenant colonel in the 91st Division in the Army Reserves. And he talked to us about the possibility of this war in Southeast Asia that was going on. And he indicated his desire that I consider joining the reserves. Well, I was 17 at the time, and I thought about it, and I had one semester at College of Marin, so I decided to join the reserves. Because if you were under 18 and a half, you only have to do 3 years of reserve duty and 6 months active. So I went in with 2 other friends of mine from the football team and did my military duty in the Army Reserve. Came back to College of Marin, majoring in business administration at that time. That was around 1964. I was officially a volunteer in 1964. That was about the time that, and that was under Fire Chief Mats Perry. Mats was retiring, so Sausalito went on a nationwide search for a fire chief, and they found one. They found a good one. His name was Charles Emerson Mastan, a.k.a. Buck. Buck, 6'4", about 235 pounds, came from Missoula, Montana. And he was a college grad, he was a school teacher, he spent time in the fire service there. He was a lieutenant in the fire department. And he came to the Sausalito Fire Department with a lot of ideas. And these ideas were progression and professionalization of the fire service. He was one of the fire science instructors at College of Marin. They taught tactics and strategy, as I recall. And that I took his class, and it really piqued my interest because he was a challenging instructor. He was tough, he was disciplined, and somebody I really looked up to. And so I was a volunteer under Buck for a couple of years, and then he said, I was working for PG&E at the time. I was 22 years old, and he said, I'm looking for some good men with an with some military background, who was disciplined, and a volunteer. He said, I'd like you to go for the job. So I tested for the position and became a firefighter in 1966, the Sausalito Fire Department. No, I was single, I was 22 years old, and the fire service was my life. In those days, it was a lot different. We worked day on, day off for 6 months without any breaks. And then we went to, after 6 months, your probation was over at that time. And then we went to a 72-hour work week. But I can remember there would be times where I'd be off duty, and Chief Mastan would drive by my house. I'd be out washing my car or something. He says, come on, get in, Bob. We're going to change out a fire hydrant. I'm off duty. So I said, sure, let's go. And so I got a chance to meet him and learn from him, and he was just this amazing, amazing person that really had a big impact on me. He was probably my best mentor. I got married to Donna Lunsford in 1970. And the marriage lasted 17 years. Then I divorced.
Children?
I have 2 children, a son, Eric, who lives in San Antonio. He's a journalist. And my daughter, Carrie, who lives in San Rafael, does very well. They're both adult children. She has, and I have, 5 grandchildren, which I love dearly. Whom I love dearly, I should say. In the Sausalito Fire Department was unique. One of the things that, I don't know if it was unique, but in my mind it was to me, one of the things that Buck brought to the program was the professionalism, specifically in EMS. We didn't call it EMS then, we called it first aid. But we changed the to the concept of emergency medical systems. At that time, all I had was an advanced first aid card. And I got that from George Walser, who was the chief of Terra Linda at the time. And George was a great teacher. He was a good motivator also. I liked him a lot. And he got me involved, George did, in teaching CPR. This was before it was even recognized by the American Red Cross. It was only by the American Heart Association, because the American Red Cross was still teaching the old hold your arm lift method. So I got involved in teaching CPR, and I liked it. I liked the concept of teaching. And so then I was on the ambulance. We had an old Cadillac ambulance in 1957, and it was not well equipped, but it got people to the hospital. It got the job done. And we progressed from that ambulance, and we got a new ambulance and new equipment, and it was more training. I got a little frustrated in my training because I could only go so far in advanced first aid. I actually thought that I wanted to become more of what we used to see on television in Los Angeles, the paramedic concept. Well, there wasn't any paramedic program at that time. Again, it was just advanced first aiders. So I really thought about becoming a nurse and going on and getting some nursing training. Well, about that time, the EMT program started out. And I certainly embraced that, became an EMT. But I still thought about becoming a nurse later on because there was not a paramedic program at that time. So the paramedic program, or the EMS, did evolve into a full-blown program for paramedics, which I was involved with later on in my career. As a firefighter, I also carried the position of fire inspector. I got heavily involved in the fire prevention program in the department. We did things like the first Saturday of each month, I made night inspections of places of assembly, put on my dress uniform, and I went out. This is when Mastan was there. And we made fire inspections, checking on exits and mainly exits, and just showing the colors a little bit, patting people on the back and saying hello so they could see the fire department. That was a big thing as far as our need is to be exposed in a real positive way. Also, we evolved in the company inspection program. This is where the concept that, and this is one of the things that Buck talked about, the fire service should be the only profession that's trying to put themselves out of a job through fire prevention activities. And by changing the behavioral patterns of our public into fire consciousness, by the exposure of the fire department and fire prevention inspections, is one of the ways that we presented ourselves. And I think we did it very, very well. I think that the fire company inspections was something that I was really proud of in the evolution of involving myself and the rest of the department, because we intimately got to know the store owners, we got to know the building, the construction, the hydrant locations, and all the rest of those things was necessary for a good firefighter. We did a lot of our pre-plannings. We determined fire flows for each areas in each large building or blocks. And that was really important to me, and I think in the fire service. Again, the only job, we should put ourselves out of a job. Buck moved on to El Monte Fire in about 1968 or 9. And then Sausalito went through a couple of chiefs that didn't work out. And at that time, there was a young lieutenant in the Sausalito Fire Department. His name is Robert Cameron Quayle. Bob was a good friend of mine. He was a lieutenant, a very bright young man. And he was given the position, or he tested for it and was given the position of fire chief. Now, Bob was a unique person. He was also probably my best friend. He carried on those same traditions that Buck had instilled in the department. Discipline, do a good job, show up to work ready to go. And he was also a big advocate for fire prevention and EMS. He was one great firefighter. That you talk about somebody that can go in and kick a door down and put some fire out. It was Bob Quayle. Bob, unfortunately, his health started failing. And when he was with the department, his speech started to slur. And the city manager called him to task and thought he was drinking on the job. Well, that's not the case. Bob went to the doctor and found out that he had amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS. This is in Sausalito. So the city manager and him had a little to do as far as his position in the department. And Bob was very upset by him being taken on. Well, at the same time, the Tamalpais Fire District was looking for a fire chief because the chief of that department, Stephen Garraway, had cancer. Steph was 31 years old. And Bob and Steph and I were all close friends. So the Tamalpais Fire District approached Bob Quayle if he would consider being their chief. So he sat down with the board of directors, and they told him what they were looking for in a chief. And if he were to come there, they passed him a sheet of paper, and they said, if you would come here, you want to write down a salary that you want. So Bob did. He wrote down the salary, $1 more that he was making in Sausalito. He took on the department in 1976. It was a ragtag department, had a small little fire station that was falling down. And his first order of business, Bob was charged with building a new fire station in the community. And this he accomplished during the period of time where he had ALS. And the degree of illness, it took its toll on him. But he was so focused on that fire station and building the image of the Tamalpais Fire District that Bob went out and recruited people that he knew would do a good job. He knew that if he surrounded himself with quality people that could be on his team, he could succeed. Well, I was fortunate enough to be one of his friends, and I was fortunate enough to be one of those people that he wanted. I went to work. I made battalion chief in Sausalito, and I took on the position of fire marshal. And about 3 months later, I went to Tamalpais with Bob Quayle, at which time I took over one of the shifts. And we had fun. Bob loved what he was doing. Everybody rose to the occasion to support Bob because of his illness, but they were so happy to have him that everybody pulled together around Bob and the new department and the new direction we were going. And, brought in an ambulance, brought new equipment, and it was fabulous. It was a great time. We really had a good department. Yes. Bob was chief for about 2 years, and as his disease progressed, he was having more and more difficulties. He came to work every day. And he was probably down from 225 pounds to 130 pounds. But he came to work and he got in his office and he communicated, he wrote down everything that he wanted to work with his staff. So at which time he was not able to work anymore, he recommended that I take over the department as an acting chief. That was in 1978. December of 78, I took over as acting chief. I was the longest serving chief of the Tamalpais Fire District for 14 years. I was involved in them all, in all of them. County Chiefs was a great organization. When I got in, I was 33 years old as a fire chief. Pretty young, too young. But there's a lot of older chiefs that were in the county at that time. They were actually getting ready to retire. But they all embraced me. They all were good people, and they all gave me a lot of good advice. And I really enjoyed working with some of the old timers, and a lot of good advice they gave me. There are several. Frank Busher, Craig Schertz, Clarksburg, took me under his wing on occasions. Buck Mastan, even though he was down in El Monte Fire Department, would also give me a lot of good information. But you know, early on, I met a guy by the name of Dick DeLong, who was the city manager of San Mateo. I went to some of these conferences, fire chiefs conferences, and it was a select group of guys. And Dick DeLong opened my eyes to start thinking out of the box as far as where city government is. You know, Dick did things like in his city, he would have all the department heads in the city work in each other's departments. For instance, the fire chief would work half day in the library for a certain number of weeks so that he would understand the administration of the library. Public Works would come into the fire department and understand the administration and the operation of the fire department. So he wanted everybody to see it wasn't only the fire service or the police department or the library, it was a whole group of other disciplines within the city that all had specific needs. And he brought that kind of attitude that opened my eyes a lot as far as the delivery of fire protection, fire prevention. Challenges, yes. Okay, 1978, I took over as fire chief. I went to a conference in San Diego early on. Pete Wilson was the speaker, the ex-governor. And he said, "Gentlemen of the fire districts, be prepared to have a reduction in your budget of 56%. There is a proposition called Proposition 13 that's looming on the horizon, Jarvis Gann. 56% reduction." So here I am, I'm just learning the budget, I'm learning finances, and I have to have a reduction of 56%. So I go back to the board of directors and say, what are we going to do? So we worked with the county, we worked with the Marin County fire chiefs in the fire districts, especially the fire districts, because the cities were going to have their own problems. So I got to work with a lot of the chiefs here in the county, Jim Berthenier, Charlie Honorato, Kenny Camp, and we all got together and formed the Fire Districts Association of Marin, and later on became the Fire Districts Association of California. Not from the Marin County, but it evolved into that. We, getting back to the specific, we were looking at laying off half the department. We did have a reserve, but it wasn't enough to cover if we were looking at a 56% reduction in our revenue. So as it was, after make a long story short, we did receive bailout funding and we were able to pretty much maintain our staffing levels and move ahead. That was probably the first major concern. Emergency medical, delivery of emergency medical services. From the Band-Aid box, advanced first aid days, to full-blown paramedic system. The evolution included Southern Marin Emergency Medical Paramedic System. The Southern Marin chiefs got together and established this joint powers agreement. And I should also point out that there were two people that really headed up this thing. It's Tom Murphy, Captain Tom Murphy from the Tiburon Fire District, and Captain Steve Osborne from the Sausalito Fire Department put together all the facts and figures of how we could establish a paramedic program, not individually, because none of us could do it individually, but we could do it collectively for a population of 50,000 people. So in 1981, a year after Novato and County started their paramedic EMS program, Southern Marin started their paramedic program in October 1981. And that was a huge milestone in my career and in my vision of the fire service. I burned a block down in Mill Valley, 160 Throckmorton, mixed occupancy, wood frame construction, non-sprinklered, non-rated. It had multi-occupancies. It had furniture refinishing, a restaurant, an art gallery, a paper store. There was about 6 or 7 different occupancies. First arriving engine gets on the scene within 30 seconds and reports fire issuing from every 3 stories from the 3rd story, all fire throughout the building. Calls in truck companies, engine companies. Did a great job. Roger Buckles was the first on the scene. I can remember coming in from Quota Madera in Chief's car, and I got on top of the hill coming into Mill Valley, and I could see the loom up. I mean, the whole sky was red. So the most taxing thing was that fire. That fire consumed, it burned to the ground. So anytime a chief has a configuration of a block, then they go out on their little speaking tour and they talk about what went right and what went wrong. Well, interestingly enough, on that fire, we pre-planned that whole area, and we knew that if that place was fully involved, we would need something like about 6,000 to 8,000 gallons a minute to control the fire, properly applied. Well, the fact of the matter was we were applying 3,500 gallons a minute. That's all the main would provide. Consequently, the fact of the matter is, if we never showed up to that fire, it wouldn't have made any difference. So the firefighters were named Citizens of the Year after that for saving the city of Mill Valley. And, you know, that was quite nice.
Did they rebuild?
Oh, yes, they rebuilt. And they put sprinkler systems in. Fire chiefs are going to take on a whole new career, a whole new concept in what they're doing. They have to be ready to, let me use the word, divorce themselves from the concept of working on a shift, because a lot of us worked on an individual shift as a battalion chief, to that of administration, being in charge of the department, going from being one of the good boys, being one of the family-oriented guys, to their boss, their chief. So they have to be able to put that aside and take on a whole new ideal, a whole new concept of management. They have to become a manager, and they can't be one of the good old boys anymore. They have to be ready for that, and be ready to make that transition. And it's a sacrifice. It's hard to give up, and it takes a while to understand that. I think the fire service has gotten too big. I think we've gotten away from the concept we should be putting ourselves out of a job. I think that you can build in fire protection into the buildings so that sprinkler systems, early warning detection, early warning suppression is there. We need to push that concept. I don't think that the cities can afford the continued growth and cost of fire protection. So I think regionalizations, consolidations, for example, should each department have their own truck company? No, you can't afford a $700,000 or $800,000 piece of equipment. But you can certainly regionalize and have a truck company for 3 or 4 or 5 departments. I think we can also look at expanding our response time. We used to look at responding within 4 to 6 minutes, 90% of all calls. No, I don't think you need that. I think we can expand our response time because of early warning detection, because of sprinkler systems in both domestic and commercial occupancies. So I think that's what we have to embrace. The fire service doesn't have as many fires as they used to. And I don't think the fire service is a good name anymore. It's essential services. It's the first responder. They've embraced hazmat and things of that nature. And that's good. It's necessary. But I think that we can ill afford the continuing levels of protection. All one has to look at cities like Vallejo, who are bankrupt. Used to be the highest paid fire station in the state, the fire department in the state. They're bankrupt now, and others are on the way. So I think the fire service is really going to be challenged as to how they're going to deliver fire protection. Are they going to continue to deliver fire protection, or is it going to be built in? Can we build in fire protection standards? We've been doing that. We've been talking about that for 20, 25 years. I got demoted to a lieutenant, and I love it. I am a lieutenant in the United States Power Squadrons. United States Power Squadrons is a boating fraternity. Promotes safe boating. It promotes training for boating operations. And I'm one of the instructors for how to operate your boat. I'm a safety inspector. And that's probably the biggest thing that I do, that I'm involved with. 6 months ago, I went and visited my grandfather's home in São Jorge, Portugal, the Azore Islands. And so we went to 3 of the Azore Islands. We went to Lisboa, went to Fatima. We travel every year. We go back to Minnesota and see my step kids and the step grandkids. Travel a lot.
So life is good.
Life is great. My day is, I'm a gym rat every morning, hit the gym, work out. Life is good. My wife and I get along great. We've been together for 22 years. We have a lot of fun. We have a lot of family. And I'm doing really well. One of the things we talked about after Prop 13, one of the things we did is when TAM was in financial difficulties, along with all the other fire districts. At that time, I was approached by Bill Walsh, who was the Director of Police and Fire Services of the city of Mill Valley. Bill Walsh is one fine man. And Bill and I sat down, had a couple of lunches together. And he talked about the concept of putting something together between the 2 departments. He says, I'm a police chief. He says, I'm not a fire chief. And I've taken this department as far as I can. I would like to bring it further along. Would you be interested in putting 2 departments together? I said, yes, I would. So we did a study. Didn't send it out. We did the study. And all we did was say, if we were to put the department together, what would the organizational chart look like? So we established Director of Police and Fire Services, Operations Chief, 3 battalion chiefs, captains, and so on and so forth. We would have 3 fire stations operating. So we put it together and said, this is what our costs are now, and this is what our costs would be if we were to consolidate down the road by reorganizing the department. So we did. Well, the problem was, when we put 2 departments together, we had 6 battalion chiefs serving a population of 20,000 people. And they weren't happy. The firefighters weren't happy. And it was a very much of a challenge, because here's this kid that's, at that time I was probably 40 years old, who came in, and some of the battalion chiefs from Mill Valley were in their 60s, and they thought that they should be chief of the fire department. So there was a lot of acrimony between the battalion chiefs and the firefighters. It was them and us. Bill Walsh and I, and that time city manager was Vern Hazen, said, we're going to keep this thing going no matter what. We're going to keep it going. We're going to move because it's right. Well, over a period of time, nobody lost their jobs. The positions of battalion chiefs they maintained. And they were, until about 2 years through retirement and people leaving, we were down to our staffing levels the way we wanted them. And the fact of the matter was, we were able to do this and save about $800,000 a year. Now, at that time, the budgets were a lot lower than they are now. But that was a major, major savings. And we demonstrated that that was, in fact, the case. It was only under a joint powers authority. And we merged operationally, and it worked extremely well.
If you were to do that,
That would be one of the things that we would have had to do. Is we would have had to involve labor more into the organization, in the organizational structure, to overcome some of their concerns and their problems. We didn't do that. It was kind of a, we needed to get this thing done, and we knew because of the players involved that we didn't think that was going to work. But if I had it to do all over again, you bet we would have gone a lot slower and a lot more carefully into it. And we would have probably have changed the structure instead of going to a functional consolidation, to a full-blown department, new organization, new fire district, or absorbing into the city, one or the other. Regionalization, I see in Marin County, my vision for the future of Marin County is 4 departments: Southern Marin, Central Ross Valley, San Rafael County, and Marin. I mean, County and Novato, working together. I think that those mergers would add staffing levels in some cases where it's needed on truck companies. They can continue EMS, hazmat, but I think they could do it a lot cheaper by reducing the hierarchy and the amount of administration. Larkspur, actually, I loved Larkspur. I had more fun at Larkspur. Yeah. You betcha. I would.